The Young and the Restless spoilers. Sally Spectra had always believed that Genoa City offered second chances to people bold enough to take them, but as the latest wave of setbacks rolled toward her, that belief began to feel like a fragile illusion more than a lifeline. When she first teamed up with Billy Abbott to run Abbott Communications, she imagined this new venture would finally be her moment. Her redemption arc after years of stumbling through fashion failures, design collapses, and personal heartbreaks. But the truth that had been quietly forming in the background was now stepping into harsh light. Not only was the company barely surviving, but Billy's impulsive temper, his emotional volatility, and his obsession with revenge were dragging everything toward an inevitable crash. Sally could sense the unraveling long before anyone said it aloud, long before whispers from Newman Towers and Chancellor Winter's meetings drifted toward her ears. It wasn't that she doubted Billy's talent or intelligence. In fact, she respected him more than most people realized. But talent and intelligence meant nothing when paired with a self-destructive nature, and Billy had always danced too close to the fire. Every plan he pitched, every strategy he proposed, carried a subtle undertone of retaliation against Adam, against Jack, against anyone who had bruised his ego in the past. And Sally knew better than anyone what happened when business became a battlefield for personal vendettas. She had lived that story in Los Angeles, survived the fallout, and sworn she would never again tie her professional identity to a man fighting ghosts. Yet here she was again, watching a company tremble because its co-founder couldn't separate old wounds from current responsibilities. The looming shadow of Victor Newman only worsened the storm brewing around her. Victor didn't just dislike the idea of Sally in business with Billy, he despised the entire foundation Abbott Communications was built upon, dismissing it as a vanity project, a misguided rebellion by Billy that he believed would collapse under its own weight. And Victor Newman rarely miscalculated when it came to the vulnerabilities of his enemies. When news reached Sally that Victor was leaning on Jill Abbott, pressuring her to cut funding, urging her to distance herself from Billy's reckless dream, Sally felt a chill run through her, not because she feared Victor, but because she finally saw how little control she truly had over the path she was walking. If Jill pulled the plug, everything would fall apart overnight. Payroll would stop. Clients would disappear. Projects would dissolve before they even began. And Sally, once again, would be left holding the shattered pieces of yet another failed endeavor. She had been here too many times. Too many collapses, too many hopes that died before taking shape. The world still remembered her as the fiery redhead determined to conquer fashion, yet fate seemed determined to remind her that dreams built on raw instinct and passion were no match for the cold machinery of power in Genoa City. Yet something different stirred inside her now, a spark that refused to let her drown in disappointment. Sally was a survivor. If Genoa City required anything, it was resilience, and she possessed that in boundless supply. She began to see that her partnership with Billy had never truly been about business. It had been about validation, about finding a place where she felt needed, where she could convince herself that she had finally broken free from her pattern of setbacks. But the reality was that Abbott Communications wasn't her destiny, it was another detour, a temporary refuge she mistook for a home. Sally had never belonged behind a desk managing accounts or mediating Billy's emotional storms. Her instincts, though often chaotic, were always sharper than people gave her credit for. She could read shifts in company culture, anticipate the next move in a corporate war, and sense the tremors of scandal before it erupted. She wasn't just creative, she was perceptive, intuitive, fearless. And those traits hinted at a future far bigger than anything she had chased before. For weeks, she tried to hold Abbott Communications together, working late nights, reviewing budgets, tightening workflow structures, and ignoring the growing dread beneath her ribs. Billy would pace the office, ranting about Adam or Victoria or whoever had slighted him that week, and Sally would nod, trying to steer the conversation back to productivity. But deep down, she knew this wasn't sustainable. She watched him unravel piece by piece, watched the bitterness tighten around him, watched how every setback reignited the part of Billy that thrived on chaos. And though she sympathized with the fractures in his past, his addictions, his insecurities, his fear of mediocrity. She could no longer sacrifice her future for someone refusing to face his own darkness. It was heartbreaking, because she truly cared about him, maybe more than she admitted. But caring wasn't enough to save a sinking ship. When Victor's interference escalated, Jill finally began to listen. Behind closed doors, she questioned Billy's judgment, reviewed the financial reports, and confronted the undeniable truth that Abbott Communications was not the powerhouse she hoped it would be. Sally saw the change in Jill's eyes the last time they met, polite, but distant, as if Jill were already preparing to sever the ties connecting them. And Sally felt something inside her settle. Not panic, not defeat, clarity. This chapter was ending, but she was beginning to glimpse the next one forming in the haze. The question wasn't what career she would attempt next, it was what identity she would embrace. She didn't want to return to fashion. The runway world held too many ghosts, too many humiliations, too many reminders of the mistakes she made in Los Angeles. Interior design had once felt promising, but that door had closed the moment she lost her sense of creative joy, replaced by pressure and conflict that left her drained. And media? Abbott Communications had shown her that she wasn't built for corporate politics controlled by moguls like Victor or Jill. No, her future wasn't in any of the industries she had already touched. Something new was calling her. Something that used everything she had been through and transformed it into something meaningful. As Billy spiraled into another revenge-driven distraction, Sally quietly prepared her exit plan. She spent long nights walking the quiet streets of Genoa City, replaying the last few years of her life. Every failed business, every heartbreak, every confrontation had shaped her into someone tougher, wiser, more strategic. And for the first time, she allowed herself to envision a role where chaos wasn't her downfall, but her expertise. She knew people, how they thought, what they hid, what they feared. She understood branding, image, reinvention. She could read emotional currents in a room faster than most executives could read balance sheets. And she had a fierce determination to survive, no matter how many times she had been knocked down. Her future was not in design, media, or fashion, it was in influence. Not influencer culture or social media fame, but real influence. Strategizing. Forecasting. Consulting. Sally was done building businesses, instead, she would build people. Reputations. Campaigns. Recoveries. Reinventions. Genoa City was full of damaged empires and fragile legacies, families torn by scandals, companies threatened by internal conflict, individuals searching for redemption or reinvention. From Adam Newman's identity crises to Kyle Abbott's insecurity to Audra's constant need for dominance, Genoa City was a place where image mattered almost as much as power. And Sally understood image better than anyone. She began to envision a consultancy firm, not a design firm, not a marketing agency, but something deeper. A reputation engineering service. A place where she would help leaders navigate personal crises, prevent scandals, build influence, and restructure their public narratives. Not PR, something bolder, more intimate, more psychological. Something only someone who had lived through public humiliation, corporate warfare, and personal collapse could offer. Every disaster she survived had given her insight others didn't possess. And Genoa City would need her far more than they realized. Meanwhile, Abbott Communications would continue its descent. Billy's obsession with proving himself would blind him to every warning sign, pushing him further into reckless decisions until the company finally buckled. Victor would get what he wanted, Billy broken, humbled, exposed. Jill would cut funding, blaming both her son and Sally, even if Sally had been the only one trying to keep the business alive. And Sally? She would walk away not shattered, but sharpened, finally ready to build something truly her own. Because Sally Spectra was not destined to be a footnote in someone else's corporate tragedy. She was destined to become the person others turned to when their worlds began to crumble, the woman who understood failure so intimately that she knew exactly how to guide others out of it. Her next chapter wouldn't just save her life, it might reshape Genoa City itself. Sally Spectra had always known that Genoa City demanded bravery, but she never imagined just how much boldness she would need to keep her dreams alive. When she first approached Jill Abbott, nervous, determined, and perhaps a bit reckless, Sally understood that asking for funding was a risk that could define the next chapter of her life. Jill was a seasoned businesswoman who didn't throw money at uncertainty, yet she saw something in Sally's ambition, something fiery and stubborn, something that reminded her of herself decades ago. Against all odds, Jill agreed to support Abbott Communications, allowing Sally to step into a leadership role she once believed would change everything. But Sally failed to anticipate the force of the Newman dynasty. A force that could destroy a dream not with violence, but with whispers, meetings, and pressure applied in exactly the right places. Victor Newman wanted Abbott Communications to crumble, not because of Sally herself, but because Billy Abbott's success, or even the illusion of it, was unacceptable to him. He wanted Jill to pull her funding, to let Billy fail publicly and painfully. And Adam Newman, though more conflicted emotionally, would hardly be the one to stop Victor if the patriarch saw an advantage in dismantling Sally's fragile ascent. So when rumors began to circulate that Jill was reconsidering her investment, Sally felt the floor beneath her shift just enough to remind her that nothing in this town came without a cost. Jill withdrawing her funding would not simply be a business inconvenience. It would be a collapse, a gutting blow to Sally's identity, a public confirmation of what many already whispered behind her back, that she had a cursed touch when it came to business, that she was a woman capable of great vision but doomed by bad luck and chaotic partnerships. And yet, the deeper truth was more complicated. Sally had poured herself into Abbott Communications, late nights, endless drafts, meticulous strategies, emotional investment she should have protected better. She believed in what she and Billy were building. She believed it could work if given time, structure, and consistency. But the world around her refused to cooperate. Victor was circling. Adam was quietly watching. And Jill, despite her initial confidence, was beginning to crack beneath the pressure. The idea that one man could dictate the fate of an entire company infuriated Sally, not just as a professional, but as a woman who had clawed her way back from ruin again and again. But the truth was brutal. If Jill pulled the plug, there was nothing Sally could do to stop the avalanche. At the same time, Sally was beginning to realize something crucial. She wasn't really in charge, not when everyone around her felt entitled to her decisions. The debate over hiring Audra Charles was the breaking point. Audra was a risky choice, yes, slick, manipulative, ambitious in ways that often bordered on predatory. But Sally wanted her because she saw value in ambition, even messy ambition. Sally was tired of playing safe. She wanted someone who understood chaos and could turn it into opportunity. Audra had survived Newman Media, clawed her way through corporate hell, and emerged more dangerous and more polished than before. Sally respected that. And that respect should have been enough to justify her choice. But suddenly everyone had an opinion: Billy, Jill, Victor, even Adam. They treated Sally as if she needed approval, as if she were merely borrowing authority instead of wielding it. Billy, meanwhile, behaved as though he could pick and choose which responsibilities belonged to him and which belonged to Sally. His decision to take one from the committee, whatever symbolic nonsense that meant, was another reminder that even when he pretended to hand the reins to her, he still expected to hold the invisible steering wheel. Their argument about pumpkin pie should have been harmless banter, but it revealed cracks that had been forming between them for months. Billy challenged her in ways that were flirtatious on the surface but deeply undermining underneath, as though he needed reassurance that Sally was not intimidated by competition. Sally's confession about her grandmother's bakery was not something she offered lightly. It came from a place of vulnerability, a place she rarely exposed. She spoke of working in the bakery as a teenager, learning the craft of dough, flavor, balance, patience. She spoke of the competitions her grandmother entered, the awards they won, the pride she once felt when people praised Sally's pumpkin pie as though it were a legacy she was destined to carry forward. These memories weren't strategic, they were personal, raw, pieces of a past she rarely revisited because it belonged to a version of herself she believed she had outgrown. But in that moment, as Billy doubted her credentials, something flickered in her, an old warmth, a forgotten confidence, a sense of self she had buried beneath corporate ambition and glamorous dreams. Why were they arguing so passionately about pumpkin pie? Why was this moment, this trivial debate, filled with so much energy, so much symbolic weight? It was almost as if fate were nudging her toward something she had ignored for too long. Then came the Abbott Thanksgiving preparations. Chaotic, sweet, deeply traditional. The Abbotts, messy as they were, valued family rituals, and their near worship of pumpkin pie seemed oddly prophetic. When Sally walked into their kitchen with flour on her sleeves and a pie dish cooling in her hands, she saw something in their eyes she had not seen from anyone in months: genuine admiration. They had praised her mocktail days before, impressed by her creativity and instincts, but the pie was something different. It felt like approval, acceptance, belonging. Things she had fought so desperately to earn in every other realm of her life. And slowly, an idea began forming, not loud, not sudden, but quiet and persistent. A bakery. Her own bakery. A place where she wasn't fighting for funding or dodging Victor's threats or defending her authority from partners who pretended to trust her. A place where she could create something with her hands, something real, something that did not depend on board decisions or corporate politics. A bakery wasn't a step backward, as some might assume. For Sally Spectra, it would be a reclaiming, a return to her roots, a reinvention built on authenticity instead of ambition. She could see it already: warm lighting, vintage decor, jazz music floating through the air, a combination of her grandmother's recipes and her own bold twists. A place where Genoa City residents could taste comfort and creativity in every bite. A place that reflected who she truly was: messy, emotional, talented, resilient, endlessly imaginative. If Abbott Communications collapsed, and it likely would, Sally would not collapse with it. Instead, she would pivot. She would rise. She would finally step out of the shadow of other people's expectations and build something that belonged entirely to her. She pictured Nikki stopping by for a latte before a gala, Chelsea bringing Connor for cupcakes, Sharon offering spiritual advice while sampling seasonal pies, Billy, yes, even Billy, standing at the counter pretending he wasn't impressed but coming back for seconds. And Victor, perhaps begrudgingly, acknowledging that Sally had found a niche no one could sabotage, because art and food and heart couldn't be controlled by boardrooms. Genoa City didn't need another media company. But it did need something comforting, something innovative, something human. The pumpkin pie argument wasn't silly at all, it was a sign. A breadcrumb on the path toward reinvention. Sally's next project might not be a corporate empire or a glamorous comeback. It might be a bakery. And for the first time in a long time, the thought didn't terrify her. It thrilled her. Because a bakery wasn't an escape, it was a beginning.